Good morning, Gideon. We are on Gimel at base 43b. If you are looking at the Gemara itself and you see the narrower set of lines and you climb up a couple of lines, the line begins with the word loy, and the second word is ki asa. Ki and then asa. You see it? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we had the Gemara discussing a number of set of laws, which I'm not going to review all now. But the laws are related to two things we talked about. Well, it starts off with the question of who is exempt from combat unit, and that had to do with whether a person has a new field, a new vineyard that they haven't yet reaped the benefits from. And by way of that discussion, we come to a discussion on, number one, the laws of Arla, the laws of new crops that are forbidden to eat of or even do anything with for the first 3 years. And the fourth year, Netar Ravoi, is when one can imachalal it, one can redeem it and use for personal use. If they redeem it and take the redemptive produce to whatever the money to Yerushalayim, and that's what the verse is referring to when it says that one who has a field but hasn't yet had a chance to redeem it on that fourth year is exempt from combat unit. So we get into a little discussion around what are the kinds of things that are obligated in Arla. We also discussed the prohibition of crossbreeding plants, fruits and vegetables and grains and whatnot. And that came up because we had a discussion about whether or not someone who grafts a field is also exempt from battle. Now, grafting can be permissible. If you have if you have two of the same species, it could be no problem. But if you're crossbreeding, then we get into the whole discussion about different opinions. Is it crossbreeding into vegetables or not vegetables, or if it's a new one into an old one into a new one, all kinds of different things. In that context, the Gemara told us that when Avdimi arrived from the Holy Land to where we are in the Gemara in Babylonia, it's a big excitement. Simcha in Shtat, that's a big excitement in town. Avdimi is bringing new Torah, new information from Eretz Yisrael, and he relates to us in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. There's actually a dispute. Our Mishnah is of the opinion that grafting is enough of a reason to be exempt from combat unit. And there's different examples of grafting, kosher grafting, the new one into the old one, grafting of a new vineyard for which you are intending to reap the fruit, but you grafted it into something that was meant originally as a border of your property. That would be a grafting that exempts you from battle. Whereas the Brisa, the other Mishnah text we raised, which says that grafting is not a reason for exemption, this follows the view of Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, who to begin with said, you have to read the verse literally. And the verse says, who planted a vineyard and you haven't redeemed, it means literally planted a vineyard and haven't redeemed. It doesn't mean apple trees, it doesn't mean orange trees, it doesn't mean grafting, it means literally what it says. That was Rabbi Yochanan's insight delivered to us here in Babel from Rabbi Dimi.
He was affirming Rabbi Eliezer's point.
No, he's just affirming that there's a dispute. He's not taking a position. He's just affirming that there's a dispute. We try to avoid the dispute because, as the principle is, we try our best to.
Did he say take the literal meaning?
Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov said take the literal meaning. Rabbi Yochanan is just telling us that Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov's statements take the literal meaning also extends to the literal translation of the word planting. We understood Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov who said take the word literally to mean vineyard and no apple trees. Rabbi Yochanan says extend that statement to Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov to also include literally planting to the exclusion of grafting. But it's not Rabbi Yochanan taking a position, it's Rabbi Yochanan clarifying Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov's position. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov living a generation or two before Rabbi Yochanan. At least, maybe more. Yeah, clear? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. What can transpire 2 generations?
Yeah. Well, to start with, lack of clarity in the text. And Rabbi Yochanan comes and gives us clarity. But Rav Dimi comes and informs us of clarity that Rabbi Yochanan provided. Yeah. Okay, so in that context, the Gemara now is going to tell us some other statements, that Rabbi Dimi brought with him from Eretz Yisrael in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, related to the laws of Arla, the laws of fruit that's growing in its first couple of years. And from there, we're going to get to other statements from Rabbi Yochanan, not through Rav Dimi, but through Rabbi Yitzchak, also tangentially related to some of the other laws. So the Gemara is going to be teaching us one law after another that are tangentially related to each other, either related to each other because they're all within the laws of Arla and Kilayim, Arla and crossbreeding, as well as some other things that are related tangentially to those laws, as we shall see. This is what the Gemara is going to do. So it's going to be one law, another law, another law, just a number of laws that are going kind of quote unquote tangent from the Gemara. Yeah, clear?
3 years.
Sorry?
During those 3 years.
Yeah.
Is a poor person allowed to
No.
take any of that?
No.
So what if there's a poor person walking along the road, he doesn't know what year it is?
There's other ties for poor people, right?
A poor person who's walking along the year and just randomly takes a fruit would be stealing.
Here's 3 ends.
Would be stealing.
Just sitting there.
Still stealing. Taking someone else's property, that would be stealing.
3 and 6.
Presumably.
Here's 3 and 6.
There are other years in which you give certain percentage to the poor.
No, the fields are open for the poor.
No. No, it's a percentage. So years 3 and 6, the second tithe is for the poor, but it's a tithe, not the whole field.
It's a tie.
Which the guy has to
Yeah,
give.
percentage.
If he goes and takes, it's called stealing. The only time it's not is when it's leket shikho peya. But there are rules to leket shikho peya. So when leket shikho peya being the stuff that the owner forgot behind or the corners.
Yeah.
Right, but those are rules. He can only come in after the owner has done his thing, then he can come in and take. Before then, it would be stealing. Yeah, okay. Let's see. The Asr Avdimi, when Avdimi arrived, this exciting event when Avdimi arrived from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, where we are in Talmud Bavli land, in Gemara land. So when he arrived, Rabbi Yochanan, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, in the name of Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov himself. So I suppose then Rabbi Yochanan is actually one generation after Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, because he's speaking in the name of Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. So it could be he met him. It's also possible he didn't meet. I don't know Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov's position in history, so if someone does, please let me know. But it's possible that Rabbi Yochanan didn't meet Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, but he's still saying it in his name because he heard from Rabbi Nasi, who was a teacher from Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. So it is possible he's quoting Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov indirectly. But it's also possible that he actually met him, in which case it would lend more credence to Rabbi Yochanan's claim last week that Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov extends the definition of literal meaning even to include literal planting and no grafting. Right? If Rabbi Yochanan actually met Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, that would further that claim. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, here he's speaking in the name of Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. So Rabbi Dimi is bringing us information from Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan speaking, quoting Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, who said, Yalda, again, this is the transition between the age of the Gemara and the age of the Mishnah, right? Rabbi Yochanan being on that border. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, compiler of the Mishnah, demarcates the end of the Mishnaic era because he compiles all that information, and then from him forward begins sages of the Gemara, sages of the Amoraic era, the Amoraim, and you can see it in their titles. Dimi is referred to as Rav Dimi, whereas Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov is referred to as Rebbe with the extra yud, which informs you if they are of the Gemara or the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan is referred to as Rabbi Yochanan, even though he's not in the Mishnah, but he's in that transition stage where he gets the title Rabbi. At any rate, but you can see the transition, Rav Dimi to Rabbi Yochanan. You see the change there?
Yeah. What one's without the yud?
That's correct. So that would be of the Gemara era.
Gemara is without the yud.
That's right. It's of a lesser title or something. Not important, God forbid, lesser on the hierarchy of halachic authoritative capacity, Rebbe's at a higher standing. Okay. So says Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov being brought to us by Rabbi Dimi via Rabbi Yochanan, Yalda, a young vine, let's say, a young tree, which is pechusa mitefach, which is less than a tefach handbreadth high,
The sapling.
sapling,
Or
but it's a kind of tree or vine that never grows past that height.
be an adult.
Could be, yeah.
Or
It never goes past that height. It'll never go past one tefach high. Says Rabbi Ben Yaakov, Chayeves ba'arla. It is obligated in arla. Kol shnoi seha, all of its years. Not just for the first 3, but forever. Yeah. Now, the Gemara now switches.
that means every year you have to go to your Shlomo or Dean.
No, it's forbidden. Arla is forbidden.
Oh, oil is forbidden.
Arla is forbidden completely. Usually it's 3 years, but this one is forever.
Forbidden meaning you can't ever.
You can't ever enjoy those fruits. Kol shnei seha, all of its years. Now, here the Gemara spoke in Lashon HaKodesh, in the original Hebrew, which means up until this point, these are the words of Rabbi Yochanan quoting Rabbi Ben Yaakov. And the next word, the Gemara, is in Aramaic, which means now it's the Babylonian commentary on that statement, presumably.
Yeah,
So these plants,
Right. That would be my assumption, yeah?
these plants grow wild.
Not well, maybe.
Why would somebody plant them?
Rabbi Ben Yaakov, it would seem, is suggesting not to plant them because you're never going to eat them. Now, why? Explains the Gemara now. So I'm assuming again the Gemara here in Babylonia is speaking, commenting on that statement from Rabbi Ben Yaakov, because now the Gemara speaks in Aramaic and says, "Demischazi kebas shasa." Because of how short it is, it always looks as if it's only 1 year old. So this is not a biblical prohibition, because biblically speaking, the Torah says the first 3 years don't enjoy, after that redeem, and in the 5th year enjoy. Sorry, but this is a rabbinic prohibition because of what's called maris ayin, because of the appearance. Someone walking by looks at it and says, "Look at this guy violating Arla, eating his new fruit." And how's this man supposed to know that it's been around for 10 years already, and that it's an awkward vine that doesn't grow so high? It's dwarf, yeah. So therefore, Rabbi Ben Yaakov says, always obligated in Arla because of the appearance. But continues the Gemara, Bahani Mili, when is this true? When is it true that Rabbi Ben Yaakov rules that one may not, that Arla applies to these dwarfed vines forever in perpetuity? That's only if shtayim keneged shtayim va'achas yotzezanav. If it is the minimal size vineyard. The minimal size vineyard in Mishnaic terms is 2 corresponding to 2 with a tail popping out. Meaning you have 5 trees or 5 vines. 5 trees. Let's just say that, right? 2 corresponding to 2 and 1 popping out in the middle. That's the minimum size that constitutes as a vineyard. It isn't the proper vineyard, obviously, but it's the minimum size to say that you've done something substantial. If that's the size of your little dwarfed trees, then the Arla applies forever. Aval but, kula kerem, but a full-size proper vineyard, kala islay, it has a voice. People know, oh, that guy's got the dwarfed vineyard. And no one's going to, because the whole field is of that size. And you've got neighbors, presumably. People know what you're planting. And if you have a huge vineyard that's tiny, that produces grapes, everybody knows these are unique grapes grown on that guy's tiny little dwarfed vineyard. And because we've now removed the suspicion of people suspecting you for misbehaving, because everybody knows you have it, and everybody knows you had it for 10 years, therefore there's no prohibition. So Levi Ben Yaakov's statement, which says that you may not enjoy of any fruit ever that grows from a dwarfed vineyard, only applies to a tiny little patch of 2 and 2, and then a 5th one popping out. Shtayim connected shtayim, 2 corresponding to v'achas zanav, and 1 tail moving forward. But if it's a full proper vineyard, everybody knows there's no issue of suspicion, and go ahead and enjoy it on year 4 after redemption, and year 5, and so on. Statement number 1 that Rabbi brought with him from Eretz Yisrael to us here in Bavel. Yeah, with me? Mm-hmm. Next statement. Clear, yeah? When Rabbi arrived again on that same occasion, presumably, Rabbi Yochanan, he spoke in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan, now he's quoting again, Mishum Rabbi Ben Yaakov, in the name of Rabbi Ben Yaakov. It's another teaching that Rabbi brings from Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Ben Yaakov.
Was Rabbi Ben Yaakov, did he learn in
He was a Tana. He was he's a scholar.
Teaching in Babylonia?
Why would it be Babylonia?
No.
He's in Eretz Yisrael, right?
He's a Tana.
He's a
Okay.
Tana.
Okay.
He's probably passed by now. But Rabbi Yochanan, the link to the previous generation, hands over information to Avdimi, who brings it to us here in Babel. Yeah? Okay. So taught Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who relate to Rabbi Yochanan, or Rabbi Yochanan somehow has that information and is passing it to Avdimi, who's bringing it to us, which is Mace, Toifus, Arba Amos, the Krishma. A dead body, a corpse, grasps literally 4 cubits with respect to the law of Krishma. Namely, that one cannot say Shema in the presence of a corpse. Because the Ksiv, as the verse reads, Lo Yiglarash Cherev Oiseu. It's a verse cited. Let's see where the verse is from.
Something about taunting the dead.
That's correct. The one who taunts the poor is doing Rash, he's poor. Right? The one who taunts the poor is doing a great shame, a great disservice. That's the verse. It's a verse in Mishlei, which is to teach us that those who have passed, who are bereft of commandments, they're bereft of mitzvahs, they can no longer fulfill mitzvahs. It's disrespectful to perform mitzvahs in their presence. And therefore, one may not say Shema within the presence of a corpse. If fulfilling a mitzvah and here's a corpse lying there and feeling terrible that it can't do the mitzvah of Shema. So it says, Yaakov, that takes up 4 amos. So if you're within 4 cubits of a corpse, no saying Shema.
But if the corpse is 6 feet down.
Same thing. Within 4 cubits of the kever, of the burial site.
If you're 4 cubits away from it,
and you could say Shema.
6 feet down, you can say Shema.
The corpse takes up all the space, so to speak, all the airspace in which it is, above and below. That's the lashon.
Depth is irrelevant.
Depth is irrelevant. It's distance, yeah. Unless there's a tent and whatever, we'll leave that alone.
Yeah.
Unless there's a separation and division between you and the corpse. If there's like a barrier, then it's okay. So, for example, at the oil, you walk to the oil, no problem. You're walking through a cemetery. You're a kohen. How do you do that? As you can see there, they built a fence and they brought a Rav, famous Rav, Rabbi Gabriel Tziner, to come and expect to make sure that it's all okay. So even though you're very close proximity, distance-wise, to the graves, but you're considered in a different domain because you're walking in a fenced-in area. That's why they built this fence. Because of the height, there's all kinds of laws around it. And you'll look up, and you'll notice that there are trees that are buried in the side of there are trees that are growing on the side of the fence. Yeah, and they have a big hangover, but they cut them flush with the wall of the fence. So it's hanging over on one side only. Because if it were to hang over on this side, you would be under the same canopy as a. So there are all kinds of laws around that. But in an open area, if there's a kever, if there's a grave, says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, you got 4 amos. Walk away 4 amos, and then you can say your Shema. Next teaching that we're bringing from Eretz Yisrael, but this time not Rabbi Dimi, at least doesn't seem like it is, comes from Rabbi Yitzchak. Now here, as you can see, Rabbi Yitzchak has the word Rabbi, not Rav. Yeah, you see it's the first wide line. Towards the end of the wide line.
Yep.
Yeah. Rabbi Yitzchak, it says Rabbi, which means presumably that he's not of a regular Amoida, he's not a regular scholar of the Gemara's era, otherwise it would say Rav. Clearly he's not from the Mishnah either, because he's quoting Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan himself is not from the Mishnah. So he must be also a sage of equal status in the hierarchy of halacha as Rabbi Yochanan. He must also be in that transition state between Mishnaic and the Gemara era.
That also gives you, I guess, indication that this is a higher authority about what's going to be said.
At the end, it's from Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. At the end, it's from Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov anyway. So he's the authority. The fact that it happens to be relayed to us by a Rabbi or by a Rav, I don't think is of any reference here. The point is, who's the original author, presumably. But maybe there is something about that. I don't know. Okay, Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, again quoting Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Chorgasa, a stepdaughter, Hagadila ben Aachen, that grows up between her stepbrothers, which aren't full brothers. And let's just assume, well, not just assume, we're going to say that they have the same, let's see, what Rashi tell us? They have the same father, but a different mother. Yeah, right. It's Bas Ishto, it's the daughter of his wife, right?
Mothers,
No, sorry,
they're
they're
half-
not even. No, sorry. Okay, they shouldn't even have. They're not even half brothers. They're step siblings, which means it's two sets of couples that have children, and then the male and female of one of the couples marry. So these two kids are not related because they have separate parents.
So like Stacy and my daughter.
Yeah, completely separate. No, well, no, Stacy and your daughter. Yeah, that's correct. Like Stacy and your daughter, they have their parents. She has her parents, and she has her parents, and then one of each of their parents marry each other. Now, if they grew up together, even though they have no blood relation, so halachically speaking, biblically speaking, there's no prohibition on their marriage because they're not related. But it says about Levi and Yaakov, asur nase. It's forbidden for them to marry each other, la'achim, to these stepbrothers, even though there's no relation. Why? The mischazi kiachasayu, because they appear to be siblings. This is Levi and Yaakov again, being concerned with appearance. Earlier, he said you're not allowed to that the dwarf plants have arla in perpetuity because it looks like they're new, right? So here too, there's appearance of siblings, even though they are not siblings, they cannot marry. But again, this reasoning, the mischazik kachasayu, that they look like siblings, is said in Aramaic, which means the Gemara's comment. It's not the actual statement of Levi Yaakov. Yeah, yeah, be with me.
But it's,
Yeah,
I don't want to go off on a tangent, but that's a bit different, no, because it's not only an appearance, it's actual closeness too.
what's wrong with
They work
closeness?
together.
So one second,
That's
hold on a
one of the
second.
bases
A guy
of
grows up
why
with his
you should.
hold on. A guy grows up with his neighbor. Is allowed to marry her.
Right?
A guy grows up with his neighbor. Is allowed to marry her. Two kids grow up in the same classroom. They can't marry each other.
No, they could,
So they happen
but
to
it's closer than that. It's a familiar closeness.
not
You're
blood,
sharing,
not by blood,
No,
not
not
by
by-
genetics,
not by
right?
blood, but
So therefore, it's fine.
it's like your sister-in-law.
So that's only
Or
that. See
something.
that's your human sensibilities,
No,
which
no,
I
I'm
which I can
thinking
appreciate. But that
you're-
has one second,
but
one
there's
second, one second,
Torah-
one second, one second, one second.
There's Torah that says you can't marry a sister-in-law unless it's a yavam.
This isn't the
yavam.
sister-in-law, and there's no blood or marital relation. Your sensibilities to it doesn't change the law.
No, but the law is you can't marry in-laws.
These aren't in-laws. There's no relation whatsoever. There's no relation whatsoever other than proximity. There's no relation other than proximity. Anyway, the point is, biblically speaking, you're allowed to. And Yaakov said you cannot. Comments the Gemara, again, because we're speaking in Aramaic, the Mischazi Kachisai, because they look like siblings, even though they are not. Now the Gemara further comments, the loyi, and this law is not correct. This law is not correct. They may marry each other. Why? Because Kala Isle Lemilsa. Because everybody knows they're step siblings. Everybody knows they're not related. Earlier, Rabbi Yaakov told us that a sapling that's less than a tefach, arla in perpetuity because of the appearance, or arla in perpetuity. We here in Bubble understood that to mean only if because of the appearance. Because it's only a question of the appearance. If you have a full vineyard, everybody knows about it. The issue of appearance is gone, and therefore after 3 years you can enjoy it. So likewise here, as Yaakov said, you may not marry your step siblings. We assume the reason is because of appearance, because biblically speaking, they aren't related. And the Gemara concludes there is no appearance issue because everybody knows the step siblings. Everybody knows not related. Notwithstanding your personal preferences or your sensibilities, it doesn't change legalities. Even in secular law, human sensibilities don't change law. Law is law. Certainly in Torah law. You don't want to marry them, it's okay. You don't have to. But the question is if
I
you...
thought there was a prohibition about that.
No, the answer is no, there is not. Yeah. Okay, so another statement now from Rabbi Yochanan, from Rabbi Yitzchak, quoting Rabbi Yochanan, quoting Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Again, are related to things that have the appearance of prohibition. Namely, Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yochanan, Mishim Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Rabbi Yitzchak further told us in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Leket shikha upeya, a poor person who collects that which is due to him because it was left behind, not which is due to him, that which an owner of a field is obligated to leave behind. Anything he forgot, whether he forgot during reaping or during harvesting, whatever it was, leket shikha, or pay, or the corners of the field that he has to leave behind. Right, we mentioned this earlier. Yeah, we're familiar with these laws. There are certain types of produce that an owner is supposed to leave behind. If he forgot them, he's not allowed to go back to get them. If he's supposed to leave the corners and so on. So now a poor person collects these. Yeah, there is. So says Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, brought to us by Rabbi Yochanan by Rabbi Yitzchak, she'asan begoydon, and he made it in a pile. He made it into like a huge heap. All that stuff. He put it together. Hukvul meiser. In so doing, he now renders those crops as being obligated in meiser, obligating the tithe. The laws of being obligated in a tithe are very specific. At what point do crops become obligated in tithe? In theory, you're walking down your field and you pick off a fruit and you eat it. There's no problem. You don't have to cut off 10% and give it away. Because only at a certain point of collection does the produce become obligated in tithe. Now, this poor person, technically speaking, doesn't have to give the tithe. But because he put it into this big pile, and now it looks like an ordinary pile that is obligated in tithe, says Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, you now have to take the tithe.
Who does?
This poor person. Because he turned it into a pile that has the appearance, the poor person turned it into a pile that has the appearance of, in the granary, you put it into the granary, that's the right word, the granary, that's the word I was looking for.
That's
Garden.
the moment at which tithes
That's right,
obligated.
but again, not biblically, because it wasn't his field.
Right, not biblically.
But it's because of the appearance, he's now obligated to bring the tithes. Now again, the Gemara gives the same limitations. Amar Ullah, in terms of when the appearance applies. Amar Ullah says, Lai Amran, the statement is only said, Ella Basada, only in a field. Out in the field, no one knows who owns what, and they see this big pile, and they see this guy enjoying it without giving a tithe. People talk, and it's got a bad view. But in the city, where this guy lives like a poor person, and he's collecting one little bit at a time, Kala Isle Milsa. There's a voice to this. Everybody knows this poor guy just collecting one bit at a time. When you're out in the field, and it's not such a place of gossip. You're out in the field, people are spread out, and here's a guy with a big pile of grain not taking tithe. It's got a bad look. But if you're in the city and everybody knows who this guy is, and everybody knows that he's taking measly pieces of food from here and here, the fact that he has a pile, everybody's okay, good, thank God he finally collected enough to make a pile. No one's getting all upset. No one's assuming that he's obligated in tithe and he's absconding on his obligation.
What happens in case that there's
Sorry?
there's a field that's not owned by anybody?
Hefker? Doesn't belong to anybody yet.
It doesn't belong to anyone.
No.
Can you read any time off that?
Why not?
That?
Yeah. Okay, one more statement from Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Sorry?
Even in the first 3 years? Because you don't know how old
I believe so. Okay, but that's already off tangent. That's not halachas we're learning right now. Okay, one more statement from Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, again quoting from Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov at the end of 43b. Yalda hapchusa mitefach, a small vineyard that is less than a tefach, a small vineyard that's less than a handbreadth, Einim Makadeshes Sazroyim, does not render neighboring produce meaning like a grain, to become invalid because of crossbreeding. It's too small. Okay, Rashi tells us exactly how to work this out, because as I mentioned before, there are all kinds of opinions when it comes to crossbreeding. and what applies biblically and what applies rabbinically. Rashi suggests that this opinion follows a very limited view on the biblical prohibition of crossbreeding. In fact, the most limited view of crossbreeding that only includes two kinds of grain, and any other grain is only rabbinic, and therefore, because it's so small, the rabbinic law doesn't apply. That's how Rashi understands this to mean. But there are other views that are more broad in their biblical understanding of the prohibition, and they may not agree with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's statement, at least not the way Rashi seems to frame it. Yeah, clear? Bottom line, this small, little, tiny vineyard is too small to render the neighboring grain as invalid because of crossbreeding. It says the Gemara again, Bahani Mili, when is this true? Shtaim connected Shtaim, Achatz. When you have a tiny minimum size vineyard, which is 2 opposite 2 and 1 popping out. It's so tiny. Both it's tiny because it's only a tefach high. It's tiny because it's only five of them. That is too small to impose upon it this rabbinic enactment that it renders the neighboring grain as invalid. Clear? But if he has a whole vineyard like that, makdish, then it does make the neighboring thing invalid because of crossbreeding, because of kilayim. Because here already it's big enough to warrant the rabbinic extension. Following?
Yeah, but neighboring.
Not necessarily belonging to a neighbor, belonging to himself.
Okay.
Neighboring as in next to each other. Yes, I want to clarify. Yes, not a neighbor that belongs to someone else. His own.
It would be unfair to have.
Yeah, in other
Someone
adam
claims
makdish davar she'ein shaloi. In adam oiseh davar she'ein shaloi. There's a rule that a person cannot make someone else's things prohibited, at least not in most circumstances. Yeah, so that's also another kind of worms that I don't want to open about neighbors. Let's just assume they both belong to him. They both belong to him, but they're neighboring each other, not neighboring because it belongs to someone else, but they're neighboring each other. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's view, as Rashi explains it, the biblical prohibition of crossbreeding is limited to very specific types of grain. Any other grain is only rabbinic. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying, when you have such a tiny little vine, it's tiny of height, and it's tiny because only 5 of them. It's too tiny to impose the rabbinic enactment that we're making your grain next door invalid because of crossbreeding.
If it's biblical grains that are growing.
No, if it's biblical ones, it's a different story.
Okay.
Here we're talking about the non-biblical ones. Yeah. Now, but if your vineyard is so big that's a full-on vineyard, then it's big enough to say, you know what, you got to follow the rabbinic rule, and your neighboring grain is invalid unless you do the other things that the Torah says, to put up a wall or whatever you have to do.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
A lot of times the Gemara mentions this guy is saying in let's say from somebody else. So that's third party hand-me-downs. Do they verify the original before they come to a conclusion?
This hand-me-down is the original. This is the original.
Sometimes as it comes down to life.
Everything you have is handed down to you. Our entire Torah is handed down to us from generation to generation. If they have a text, they have a text. They don't need to quote anybody, but they don't have text, right? They have people's memory.
The Torah is between 2 people or 3 people. God and somebody else.
I'm saying all the information you have in the Gemara is handed down to you. It's all handed down. It's the oral tradition, right? We're the first ones writing it down. We, as in the Gemara and the Mishnah. Verified how? By whom? By what? If they have an original text, they don't need to quote someone in the name of someone. They just have the original text. Then they would say, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnaic text. If they're quoting someone who's quoting someone who's quoting someone, it means they don't have a text. I'm not following.
Should they take that into consideration?
I mean, presumably they're giving commentary on it, right? They even rejected one of them. Right? One second. One of the hand-me-downs was step siblings can't marry. They rejected it. They rejected it because, well, there is people know, and therefore there's no problem. Right? So obviously the Gemara is commenting on what's being said. But everything we have as in we, the Mishnah, where does it come from?
I know.
It's all oral tradition. So of course it's going to be oral tradition. There's no verification other than the oral tradition and the rules of interpretation that Hashem gives us, right? This is what it is. There's no text to verify it by. If there was, then the Gemara wouldn't be quoting someone who's quoting someone else who's quoting someone else. It would just say, Tanu Rabbanon, we learned in the Mishnah text, so on.
Yeah.
That's it. Not sure if that helps, but that's the way Torah tradition is, right?
It's not always true.
Now you're making another conclusion. Now you're going to a leap.
Well, it could be exaggerated at some point.
Do we trust our sages or do we trust our sages or not?
We trust them,
Then that's it.
but they're not doing it. They're not doing it purposely.
So you don't trust. Do we trust our sages or not? If the answer is yes, then this is what we have. This is our tradition. Do you trust Moshe Rabbeinu that he transmitted the information faithfully to Yeshua? You trust Yeshua that he transmitted it faithfully to the next generation, and the next generation, the next generation, then that's the text you have.
That's all indicated in the Torah.
No, it's not. It's the same indication as this one. All the tradition we have is one person teaching another person another. Just you don't see the names written on the both thing. If you want, you can write to Blessed Yaakov, heard it from this one, heard from this one, heard from this one, to Yeshua, to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now it's better. That's every single Mishnah. Every Mishnah is like that. Someone's speaking. Where do you get that information from? From someone else. We got it from someone else. We got it from someone else back to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's our whole tradition. It just so happens, which is actually the fact that the Gemara gives these names gives it more validity, not less. That's why the Gemara puts these names down to tell you it's not just a guy speaking. It's someone who heard from someone who heard from someone who heard from an authority. That's the whole reason why we do that. If we took the names away, it would becomes less, not more, of a problem.
When you were a kid, you play this thing called broken telephone.
So that's why I get back to the same question: do we trust our sages or not? And if we trust our sages, it is a matter of trust. Do we trust that our sages throughout the generations, from Moshe Rabbeinu to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, relayed the information faithfully?
They are relaying the information faithfully.
And that's the text we have. That's the text we have. But that's the text we have. The text we have is what was relayed faithfully from generation to generation. This is the text we have. 1 second. I'll ask you this way. If the Gemara is a Tanu Rabbanan, and we have a text, it's better for you? Where did that text come from? So it's better for you somehow? It came because someone got a tradition from someone else, and you wrote it down. So because it's written down, now it's better. So if it's written down in the Mishnah, yes. Written down in the Gemara, name of somebody else, no good. It's the exact same thing. It just so happens the Gemara is citing to who's relaying the tradition. But it's the same writing down of the same tradition. It's just pushing the generation back forth and at all, not following.
Follow them.
It doesn't matter what text you're holding. Whether you're holding the Gemara or you're holding the Mishnah, it's all tradition being passed down. So because the Gemara told us who passed down tradition, it ruined it for you. Had the Gemara not told us who passed down tradition, it would have been better for you because now it's a text. It's still a tradition being passed down from generation to generation. The Gemara was honest and told us who the people were. And that somehow undermines the validity. It's backward thinking. Anyway, okay. Have a wonderful day, Eden.